Okay, class, today we're going to actually start a new chapter, chapter 11, and we're going to look at this idea of rational numbers. Now, who remembers? What did we say rational numbers were in one word? That's right, we said rational numbers is a number that can be written as a fraction. If we look up here above my board and we read the definition, a rational number is a number that can be expressed as the ratio of two integers. And the easiest way to say it's a ratio is to write it as a fraction. So a real number that can be expressed as the quotient of two integers is called a rational number. You and I know quotient means division, and the way that we show a division problem now in algebra is by using the fraction bar. Now, so first thing we need to check out is how do I write these different examples of rational numbers as a fraction, as a quotient of integers? Well, the easiest way for me to take 3 and write it as a fraction, we're just going to put it over 1. Easiest way. Now, you could be elaborate. You could say 9 over 3 or 12 over 4, but the easiest way to take a whole number and turn it into a fraction is to put it over 1. Do you remember how to take a mixed number and make it a fraction? Remember, it's 1 times 4 plus 3, so we're going to get negative 7/4. The easiest way to take a percent and write it as a fraction, well, we learned that percent is per 100, so we would make this 48 over 100. Now, remember, you've got to always reduce your fractions. So when I look at that, I think my GCF is 4. Okay, if my GCF is 4, then we're going to have what? 12 over 50, 12 over 25, sorry. All right, and then 6/10, well, we're going to write that as 6 over 10. 1 decimal place is the tenths place, and again, make sure you reduce it to 3/5. All right, so we can take a different variety of rational numbers, and we can change them to the quotient of two integers, or we can write it as a fraction. Now, the big deal with section 11.1 is comparing rational numbers. So they want us to determine which of two rational numbers is greater. Now, we've got two different methods, okay? And we're going to look at, if you look on your note sheet on example number 1, there's two different solutions. We can either find a common denominator and compare, or we can cross multiply. So let's see what that looks like. If you look at example number 1, okay, and let's use our common denominator first. If I have 7 thirds and I have 9/4, well, I think we'd choose our common denominator to be 12. And so if I did that, if I made my equivalent fraction, remember 3 goes into 12 4 times, 7 times 4 is 28. And then over here, we're going to make that 12ths as well. So 9 times 27. Now, we've got a common denominator, so it's easy to compare. Now remember, the big fat side of my inequality sign goes by the big fat number, so 28/12 is going to be bigger than 27/12, so we would put our greater than sign. Now, the second way to check that out then is to use cross multiplying. And again, Mrs. Burton doesn't really care which way you go, just so long you get the right answer. So if I'm going to cross multiply, it's going to be 7 times 4, which is 28. And then 9 times 3, which is 27. You notice I got the same numbers there? All right, and so again, the big fat side goes by the big fat number. So we would say that 7/3 is greater than 9/4. Okay, so again, you can find a common denominator. You can find a common denominator, or you can cross multiply. And again, I kind of flip back and forth between the two different methods depending on which one's easier to get done. Okay, now, the second thing we need to look at in this section is this idea of the density property. Now, when we're talking about regular numbers, there's always a number that comes after. We know that 4 comes after 3, and we know that negative 2 comes after negative 1. The problem with rational numbers that between every pair of different rational numbers, there's a bunch of other rational numbers. Think about your ruler. Okay, if you looked at your ruler, we could take those inches and we could divide that inches into fourths. We could divide it into eighths. We could divide it into sixteenths. So we can divide that chunk of the ruler up into as many different divisions as we want. And so that's the problem when we come with these rational numbers. There's a bunch of rational numbers in between two rational numbers. And so this is where the density property comes in. Now, our formula is here. It looks like this. This is our formula, but do you good to memorize it. And so we've got A plus 1/2 B minus A. Now, when you see the problem on the quiz or the test, it's going to look like this. It says find the number halfway between 5/8 and 3/8 and 5/9. Well, my first fraction, we're going to make that A. First fraction, we're going to make this A and we're going to make this B. And let's just plug everybody in where they belong. If you notice, I put your density property up at the top. So A is 3/8 plus 1/2, and then it's B, 5/9 minus A. Now, order of operations says that we should actually take care of what's in the parentheses first. But remember, before I can add or subtract fractions, I have to have a common denominator. So if you look, I think 9 times 8 is the easiest way to go. 72 is going to be my common denominator. So now we need equivalent fractions. 9 goes into 72 8 times. 8 times 5 is 40. And here 8 goes into 72 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So if I take care of the math in the parentheses, now that I have a common denominator, I can subtract. 40 minus 27 is 13 over 72. And then we'll just fill in the rest. Now, what should I do next? Well, order of operations says I should multiply next. Now, so if I'm going to multiply, then I'm looking at this part of the equation. Unfortunately, nothing cross cancels. So we're going to end up with 3/8 plus, and we're going to have 13 over 144. Now, the last thing we need to do now is add those fractions, but I can't do that yet because I don't have a common denominator. Well, first thing I'm going to try, will 8 go into 144? Because if it does, that would be a nice, helpful hint to help me find my common denominator. So let's try it. Does 8 go into 144? Well, that's 1, and that's 6. Or that's 8, and then we got 64. Oh, yes, okay. So 8 goes into 144 18 times, and then we're going to have to multiply that by 3. So we've got 18 times 3. That's going to be 54. So we've got, I'll go over here now. So we've got 54 over 144. Okay, I just made my equivalent fraction, plus 13 over 144. And now that I have a common denominator, we can add. And so we're going to get 67 over 144. Now check it out and see if you can reduce that fraction, but that fraction's in lowest terms. So make sure that you can compare fractions, which is what we did in example 1. You got 2 methods. You can find a common denominator, or you can cross multiply, and make sure you know how to use the density property if they want a number halfway between, okay? And that's the end of our lesson for today.